Welcome to our first event of the year 2021. This is our Global Campus Spring Kickoff. We want to first welcome back those of you that are our current online students, those of you that have been taking online classes with us for a while now. And we also want to take a moment to welcome those of you that are new, that this is your first term with Boyce Online or Southern Online. Tonight, we are going to be doing a few different and unique things for this virtual event for those of you that may be familiar with our previous events. So first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Liz Lavoie, and I'm the Online Student Experience Coordinator for Online Learning. And so we hope that with these virtual events that you get connected with your online peers, with your professors, and our team as well. So tonight we have with us Brian Renshaw, who is the Associate Vice President of Global Campus. And we also have Dr. Pennington, who is one of our professors here, and many of you probably will be taking courses with him online. So tonight, what we'll be basically doing is an author interview. So you'll get to hear Dr. Pennington discuss his latest release, Jesus, the Great Philosopher, and you'll also have an opportunity to engage in a live Q&A. So before we begin this evening discussion, I want to remind you of two important things. One is that we will be announcing our 3 giveaway winners at the end of the event. So make sure to stick around. If for some reason you're unable to, just feel free to send me a message if you have to leave the Zoom event a little bit early tonight. And then the other thing that I want to invite you all to participate in is the Zoom chat feature. So throughout the night, if you have questions for Dr. Pennington, for Brian, whether if it's about his latest book or about online learning, whatever you're interested in with ministry, theology, all of those kinds of questions that you may have, feel free to send them in the Zoom chat. And we also want to encourage you to engage by first going ahead and telling us where you're from, where are you watching this from, where you're located. We would love to get to know you a little bit. So I'm going to hand it off to Brian, and we're going to get started. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Liz. So like Liz said, I'm Brian Renshaw. I am the AVP for the Global Campus. So that just means Boyce College online, Southern Seminary online, and Hispanic online. We all kind of run this together. And I'm with my good friend, Dr. Jonathan Pennington. I've known Dr. Pennington for, almost 10 years now. We've been in small groups together, taking classes, and just done a bunch of stuff together. So, Dr. Pennington, who are you?
I'm the friend of Brian Renshaw. That's all you need to know. I've arrived. So I am a New Testament professor here. I started over 15 years ago. I don't know if my 15th or 16th year, but somewhere in there. And before that, I was in Scotland doing a PhD. My wife Tracy, and I have been married just over 28 years. And we have 6 kids, including a student at Boyce and all kinds of, and actually my oldest is a student in the worship program now as a master's student as well. So it's been a delight to be here at Southern all these years. For 9 of the last years, up until December 31st, I was also the director of the PhD program. And so some of you may know me in that context or have run into me that way. I'm also a pastor at Sojourn East. The lead pastor, Kevin, and I share the pulpit in about a 2/3, 1/3 proportion, and also the spiritual formation pastor there. So I do a lot of other things there. So that's a total joy for me as well. So glad to be here.
Awesome. So you've been here almost 15 years. What's your favorite class or favorite classes, if you can't pick a favorite, to teach? Both on campus and online. I know you've taught some on campus stuff that's not online, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's an easy and an impossible question to ask because I love my job and I get to teach the Gospels is what I mostly do. And that is just such a joy. And so I do it in NT1, which is our gospel survey class, which I've taught thousands of students now. And a lot of you will probably take that class as well. And it's a total joy for me. But I also teach this Greek exegesis of Matthew class once a year. I think this is my 15th or 16th time in a year in a row teaching it. And that's really fun for me too, because I get to really dig even more deeply into Matthew. So it'd be a toss up between those two, because those are both a total joy for me.
Yeah,
So.
awesome. So as we get started here, before we dive into talking about you as a writer and your new book, what are some, maybe just a couple of tips or encouragements that you can give to online students as they're, people are in various stages. Some are just starting off, some are at the end of their degree. So what are some ways you can encourage them as they start the spring semester here?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to thank you guys for coming to Southern. We know it's a sacrifice of time and money to do so, and especially online is so intense with 8 weeks. Because to Brian's credit and his predecessors before us, and Brian worked in the office even before he was in this role. Um, when we began to do more and more online, there was a conscious choice to not uh, make it less than robust, to make it less than what was going on campus. And so that's great news. The bad news is we typically take 13 weeks worth of material and cram it down into 8 weeks, which the good news is you're not losing any quality or rigor, but it does mean it's very intense. But so just want to thank you for the sacrifice that it is, and just say, the key, I think, for those of you who have taken online classes before, is you've just got to stay with it. If you get behind a little bit, it's just harder to catch up. So envision those 8 weeks as you're just going to be it's going to be intense, but you're going to learn a lot. It's drinking from a fire hydrant, but stay with it, be diligent as you go along. And just overall, I think this applies to all seminary education, just to encourage you that, yes, this is difficult. These classes demand a lot from you, but you remember, you're two different metaphors. You're digging a very deep well from which you can draw water for the rest of your life. And this is your chance to do that, to dig a deep well, to be forced to dig a deep well with a smiling taskmaster, but you're digging a deep well, and that's worth it. And you won't regret that later. You won't have this opportunity for formal education probably ever again. And the second metaphor is to think of in terms of investment. You're investing in your future self. And so, everybody always says, if you're age 18 and you start putting even $10 a week away, you'll be a millionaire at age whatever. And none of us do it. We all wait till we're 40 and I need to save money. But this is the time to think that everything you're doing, every Greek paradigm you memorize, every book that you didn't really love that much, maybe, that you got through and wrote a report on, you're investing in your future next several decades of your life. You're putting money in the bank of your soul that you'll be able to draw from for the rest of your life. So just stick with it. It's worth it. You can do it, and you won't regret any labor you give yourself to now.
Yeah, I know we've talked about numerous times, like that seminary is like the one time in your life that you're going to be able to dive in deep, study with experts, discuss with other students. There are tons of free resources out there and everything else, but just the way life works, you're never actually going to spend that time drinking from the well and investing, like you said. So those are great encouragements, great tips. So yeah. So we were talking, before we started this, you now have several books out. You have that nice little stack that we're going to do the giveaway at the end. So you have your Introduction to New Testament that you wrote with Con Campbell. You have Reading the Gospels Wisely, the Sermon on the Mount book, and now Jesus the Great Philosopher. I think you're working on one more. Several more. Well, right. One more that's imminent, coming.
About to come out. Yeah.
About to come out. So out of those, what's been kind of your favorite to write? I'm sure each one has a little bit of its favorite, but if you had to pick one.
Yeah. I do think this book here is the book I'm most proud of at this point. I think it's the best written book, and it really represents a maturity of my thinking, I think, and also even a little bit of a shift in my writing. The other books I've written so far were, in the case of Gospels Wisely, an earlier book, Heaven and Earth and the Gospel of Matthew, then Reading Gospels Wisely and the Sermon on the Mount and Human Flourishing. each of those books were written for me in the sense that I needed to figure something out, right? But something's happening now, which is a natural thing that's happening in my career, kind of at this stage of my career and just my biological age and my understanding of things. There's an increasing shift towards all the things I've been working on for years, kind of, nailing those to serve other people. Not that the other books didn't either, but the other books were really for me to figure something out, And so the introduction to the New Testament really represents, 25 years of study for me and for Khan as well. I've kind of put together a certain way of reading the New Testament. I think is helpful. It's theological, informative. But then this book in particular, it really is the culmination of many years of thinking and wrestling with what the Bible's about and how we're supposed to read it, and really what Jesus is calling us to be disciples. And for me, I really wanted to write something that my mother-in-law could read, but also could be really appreciated by a seminary student and a pastor. And it's shorter, than my other books so far. And it's, now some of you aren't going to like this, but it's got end notes instead of footnotes. And I formerly would have judged such a book because I'm a footnote lover as well. I love reading footnotes, but I also realized that I wanted to reach people in my church. When I go and travel or in my own church, if somebody comes up to me after I preach, they've said, what can I read of yours? And I always hate to hand them like a 350 page academic book. Well, and some of them will read it, but I really want to write something that anybody in my church, a thoughtful person, could read. And so I feel like after a lot of work on the craft of writing, that's what I really worked on, the craft of writing. I feel like I learned to tell a story, not just make an argument. And so this is really trying to paint a picture, cast a vision, invite people in to see the Bible in a certain way and see Jesus in a certain way. It's not just making an argument. And so I think so far, this is the book I'm the most proud of. So.
Yeah, our conversations over the years, it's been cool to see this like kind of culminate into this book. Anywhere from just reading the Gospels wisely, and then some articles that you worked on, and then your Sermon on the Mount book, I think really sparked some of these ideas as Jesus as a philosopher. So that's been cool to see over the years, and just the maturity of thinking through these things. And I think just as students, it's also encouraging to think like, we don't have to have it all together now. You talked about, those early books were you figuring something out, and now as you've done that, you've been able to kind of say, okay, here's what I think on this, and able to present something. So that's really encouraging. So what we kind of talked about it, but what inspired to write this book? You talked about wanting to write for the church, something a little bit more accessible for that. But what inspired this topic in particular?
Yeah. And it is odd. I know it's odd sounding, and it took quite a few years of thinking, and then even convincing my publisher that this title wasn't a disastrous idea. And so far the book's done well, so I think I was proven right. But the most important thing is that this really, I often describe as kind of a leapfrog moment. So after many years of studying Matthew, and then increasingly narrowing down to studying the Sermon on the Mount, and then coming to recognize that the Sermon on the Mount was a bit of wisdom literature, and that was part of a larger reality of the Bible, that God, again, is inviting us into this idea of human flourishing, or the thing we all long for, the shalom, or peace, or happiness, which is kind of a weak word now, but the life, the eternal life now and to come, that is actually abundant, as John 10:10 Jesus says there. And so as I was finishing the Sermon on the Mount and Human Flourishing book, which is part commentary, part argument for how to read, it was just these things were maturing in my mind and making more sense. And I realized that I really wanted to see whether the whole Bible could be understood in the way that I was reading the Sermon on the Mount, and particularly to kind of do a rediscovery. The subtitle has rediscovery in it, and that's very intentional, because as I kept studying the sermon and kept studying Jesus in his own first century context, I realized that, we've lost this major image that was all the church fathers talked about and was a basic part of church architecture and church paintings and all that. This idea that Jesus, one of his main titles is philosopher. And that's just so weird sounding to us. And I start in the book with this image of, like, if you were to walk into a church today and you saw these different banners of descriptions of Jesus: Savior, Lord, King, Shepherd, Friend of sinners, whatever it is. And if we saw a philosopher on there, we'd be like, what kind of weird church is this? But the reality is that in the ancient world and throughout for many, many centuries, at least till the Reformation and beyond, that was a regular way that people talked about Jesus. And so I thought, what is going on with that? And I realized it was connected with this fundamental idea that God is offering us life, the life we actually long for. Now, what Jesus says eternal life looks like is shocking, right? I mean, it involves suffering, it involves waiting, but it's still life. He's still offering us what we really long for. And so it really is kind of an expansion of a lot of the ideas I came to in the Sermon on the Mount and Human Flourishing, and showing that it's true in the whole Bible, and then trying to apply it to some certain areas too. And I don't know if we have time to get into that as well, but that was how it came about.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think when we normally think of philosopher, we think of somebody just sitting contemplating
right.
big ideas or things. So
as people drop grapes in their
right,
mouths or something.
Exactly.
Right.
And so you talked about that the church fathers called Jesus a philosopher. That doesn't really fit with our picture of that. Would you just maybe give like a 1 minute spiel on what an ancient philosopher was and how that's a little bit different than how we normally think about it today?
Yeah, and that's key. And I should have said that. So thanks for saving me there. Yeah, a big part of the development here was that I came to realize that what philosophy was in the ancient world was fundamentally different than what philosophy is today. And the reality is that actually there are tons of people offering philosophy of life that are not philosophers. Like, we call them life coaches, or we call them Oprahs, or we call them business leaders or whatever. I just, in a rare moment, I happened to be in a Barnes and Noble today because somebody gave me a gift certificate and I wanted to buy a game there. So I was in Barnes and Noble, and it was interesting, like in the little vestibule when you're going in, they've got like all these clearance books, and on the left was crystals and chakra and all this kind of, I guess, start the year right with, Eastern mysticism or whatever. And on the other side was all these like life coach books, tons of them, like emotional intelligence, books, be your own life coach, or, flirt, thriving in 10 minutes a day, all these books about how to live well and find peace in life, right? Well, that whole world of books today is what ancient philosophy was about. And I think the ancient philosophers like Aristotle and Seneca and others were generally a lot more sophisticated and more broad-minded than a lot of the books today. But the goal was the same. How do we help people learn to really live well? And that's what philosophy was. It's a love of wisdom. How do you learn to think about what the world is like, and what is the true and the good and the beautiful, and how do we structure our relationships, and how do you handle your emotions, and what do you do with those? All those questions were what ancient philosophy was about. And so that's why they were so important in society. Where today, now I love philosophy, I'm not dissing on philosophy, but it's very different. Philosophy today is much more about particular ideas. It's not about virtue and happiness and being a full person. It's just very different. And so that's the idea in which Jesus is a philosopher. He's giving the wisdom needed to really live the truly flourishing life, which is only found through following him, is what he's going to say.
Yeah, I think you've had some renaissance in this. You have like Jordan Peterson and
Jordan Peterson,
definitely. 12 Rules of Life, but he's
Yep.
a psychologist, so he's not formally a philosopher. Then you have like guys like Ryan Holiday, who is picking up the Stoicism, trying to trying to revamp that. So
Yeah, those are probably the two, well, those two, and then one of my favorites, Alain de Botton in the School of Life, I think is probably the most comprehensive views
yeah,
that are available today. You're right. Yep.
yeah, which is different than the self-help categories, which is probably why these types of ideas have exploded, because it's actually giving a comprehensive way where you're arguing, Jesus's way of life, in that same vein. So,
And that Christianity really presents itself, Old and New Testament and early church, as just that. I mean, that's the appeal of it. They're not just saying we don't care about those questions. They're saying you want to know the real answer to them. It's found in Christ.
Right. Yeah, which is very helpful thinking about Christianity. It's not just rules to live by, or just how to get saved and other things. It's actually a comprehensive vision of what does it look like to be a true human being. So that's really helpful. So yeah, so we've kind of hit on this, but what's probably like the most important thing, if somebody's reading your book and they finish and they're going to go, tell their spouse or tell their church about the book, what do you hope that they've got out of it that they want to communicate from there?
Yeah, I think what you just said was actually a good summary, but I could say it in slightly other words too. And that
I've heard you speak about it so much that
you traveled with me when I gave some early lectures on this several years ago. Yeah, I've lectured on this in various places, and Brian was my chauffeur and note taker on one or two of those occasions. Yeah, so that was great. Yeah, one of the ways I talk about it is that our lives have both a vertical and a horizontal axis to them. And the vertical would be our relationship to the divine, to the divine, or to God, and the horizontal would be relationship to the world and others. And a lot of times in our Christian faith, and especially maybe within our evangelical tradition, we're really good on the vertical part, and we really emphasize what we should: correct understanding of God, worshiping Him with a whole heart, etc. And that's all wonderful. We don't need less of that. We don't need less of Jesus as King and Lord and Savior. We need all of that. But we haven't always had it really clear in our minds what the Bible says, or how important it is for us to think about the horizontal parts of our lives, like relationships with each others, and what it means to be an embodied creature, and our emotions, and relationship to society, and happiness, even just like what it means to be human. Like those things we haven't done probably as good of a job on those as evangelicals, especially because we so have emphasized the vertical part that we've kind of forgotten the horizontal part. And so I think the biggest thing I'd want somebody to take away is that Christianity and Jesus is offering a whole life, a whole way of seeing and being in the world, or what I like to call it, a way of inhabiting the world, that is not just about my relationship with God, although that's foundational. It's also about my relationship to the world, and relationship to others, and relationship to myself. And that Christianity cares just as much about those things. And that's part of the whole philosophy that Christianity offers.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So kind of going more broadly to the act of writing. So many seminary students are interested in writing and writing well, and that's part of the goal of seminary, is to learn how to write and communicate well. So you've written several books now and papers, and what just maybe a couple of writing tips that you could give seminary students, whether or not they're going to write a book, but most people, whether you're in a church setting, you're writing curriculum, or you're writing a vision for the church, or stuff. What are some ways that people can practically write better, in things that they're doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Well, as you know, for the last 9 years, I've taught a class on writing as well, which I love. And so I have to resist the temptation to vomit all that out there, but because I have a lot of thoughts about it. But let me say two opposite things that exist in a happy paradoxical truth. On the one hand, you probably have heard of the 10,000 hours rule, right? That if you want to be good at anything, tennis, or, carpet laying, or whatever it is, you got to spend 10,000 hours of doing it, because just the repetitions of it. And so the sooner you start, and the regularity with which you do something, is absolutely essential. And so the first thing I'd say is, there's no way to get better at writing than by writing. I mean, you've just got to do it, and you've got to write and rewrite and keep trying. So you can't expect that you're going to just not write for the rest of your life. And then when it comes to write a paper or something, you're just going to naturally be good at it. You need to write every day. You need to write in all different kinds of formats. And, a lot of times people do what's called morning pages, where you just kind of free verse write, you just write whatever you think or what's going on, which is good therapeutically, but you need to write regularly. And so for many years now, I've been writing, 750,000, sometimes more than that. That's often just in the morning. And then if I have a day where I can write other times too, there's just no substitute for writing a ton. You'll never get better until you do it, just like tennis or anything else, right? On the other side, there's been a happy debate about this kind of 10,000 rule. I'm blanking on the guy's name. I should know.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, Gladwell. Yeah. I don't know, Brian, if you've seen the book Range, which which is interesting too. So let me say the opposite of that, and that is, I think the 10,000 hour rule is fine and probably true, but the guy whose name I'm also blanking, I'm being horrible with authors tonight, that's written the book Range, he talks about how actually having a wide variety of skills can actually contribute to doing well at anything. So he gives a bunch of examples of people who are like exceptional athletes who actually started in a different athletic field and then converted and then dominated the other one, because it wasn't just about doing one thing for 10,000 hours. It was actually learning a range of skills. And so I would say then that too with writing is that you need to read broadly, you need to write broadly, you need to be a mind awake that's exploring lots of things and hungrily and happily devouring everything you can find. Right? So, don't be a skeptic. Don't go through life with a squint eye. Is that author true? Is that author good? Learn what you can with discernment, of course, spit out the bones, but read happily and hungrily and write happily and hungrily and kind of do that range thing. So I think if you can sort of add those things together or keep them in tension, that's the key to really growing as a writer. And be patient. It takes time. Writing is super hard. I hate it. As I always like to say, I'm like what Mark Twain said, I like having written. I actually don't like writing. I like having written. It's nice to have something written and afterwards, but it's painful. So expect that it's going to be hard to do, but it's worth it.
Yeah. So David Epstein, I think he's the one that wrote Right.
Yeah, I need you. I need you in my life, Brian. This is good.
Exactly. So this, and you've talked about this before, but like that ideas are created by, putting different things together. Totally. And one of the unique things about human beings is we don't just like look at something and we're able to recognize that. Like animals can, look at something and, know what's going on, but humans have the ability to put ideas together and create something actually new. Yeah. And you've done this numerous times in teaching and all the other things. So I think, that reading widely, whether or not it's in your subject or so often it's things outside your subject that spark ideas as you're writing, or I think pastors can probably relate to this, that sermons, so many examples and applications and everything else come from things that wasn't in their study. It was just from life or reading or other things like that. So that's really helpful. So you kind of got to this. One of the students asked, what are some practices in your life of just practical? You talked about, writing in the morning or something like that, but some disciplines that have been really helpful for you being a writer who doesn't like writing, but have written, but that kind of gets you in that mode.
Yeah. I mean, like everything, you have to choose what you want, especially, writing is in that, as I always like to say, writing's in that most dangerous of the Stephen Covey quadrants of not urgent, but important. So nobody's going to make you do it and make you do it diligently. So you really have to choose to build it into your schedule. And one of my favorite writers and writers on writers, Annie Dillard, she describes a schedule as a scaffolding by which you build your life, and that you have to choose to say, and really practically, like the night before, some super practical stuff. Set your clothes out the night before. Okay, that'll save you a lot of mental energy. Set your clothes out, prepare your workspace. Um, you know, set out the books that you were going to be working on or whatever you're going to do. Have your computer plugged in or whatever. Make it easy for yourself to be productive when it's time to be productive, right? By taking, don't let things distract you when you're in there. Don't look at social media in the morning, anything. Don't look at your email, because if you want your emotions and things to get distracted, if you want to write, now I'm a morning person, so this is what works for me. Maybe for you, you're at night, but you can do the comparable thing. Carve out a time, be intentional about it, make it sacred, prepare for it, and then step into it and do it, even if you don't feel like it, right? You build a scaffolding around your life by having an intentional schedule. And then, God's very kind to us, because once you start doing it, then the juices get flowing, right? And then sometimes you wish you could have more time, do more than you have time for, but you just do it diligently, and always think, just play the numbers, play the long game. If you only even write 300 words a day, which is really very little, if you only write 300 words a day, if you do that 5 days a week, that's 1,500 words. You do that 4 weeks out of the month, that's 6,000 words. I mean, that's an article, right? I mean, that's a chapter of book, that's a paper, whatever, and that's only 300 words a day. I mean, that's like almost nothing, and that's just doing in the morning. So I think just play the long game, be diligent, make a choice that this is something you want to do with your life, and you could do it.
Yep. I think you've talked about a lot, like you never actually know what you're going to say until you actually say it.
Yeah.
And so that writing process allows you to create those thoughts and solidify them and everything else. So, so let's see. So Jesus, the Great Philosopher, we kind of talked about, what one of the students asked, how did you come up with that title? And I guess I'm going to ask, how did you actually sell it to your publisher?
Yeah, because you're right.
Just a second.
Somebody's at the dentist.
All right. Sorry.
All right, we get it's all right.
my speakers. Could you guys not hear that? My speakers were going crazy.
Yeah,
okay. So, sorry about that, everyone.
That's okay. Sounded like somebody was at the dentist getting their teeth
done.
So actually you were there, Brian. I remember in one of the conversations I had with Jim Kinney, the Vice President Baker, and others who didn't think this was a great title. So how did I win? I don't know. I've had worse titles come out of my mouth before, so maybe this wasn't as bad as some of the others. So what was the question? How did I come up with this?
Yeah, how'd you end up coming up with Jesus, the Great Philosopher?
It went through a lot of possibilities. I have a whole Evernote file of 1 million possible titles that we could have used. The uphill battle was philosopher, obviously, because whenever you're titling something, or even just using a word in a sermon or any situation, you always have to evaluate if you want to kind of use the word in a different sense to make some point. You have to decide whether the uphill battle is too much, and that was the question with this. Like, could we redeem the word philosopher, or was it not redeemable? And if that is it too, are the associations too negative or too dry? And at first, everybody I talked to thought they were, right, and I was always like, no, I can redeem this word, I can turn it around. But we tried 1 million other titles, some horrible, just in the conversations, Jesus the Sage, Jesus the Life Coach, obviously that was too weak. Jesus the Guru, that was one I was convinced on for about a week. Jesus the Guru.
Well, I'm glad.
I know.
Somebody saved it.
I know. I thought might not have a job here if I said Jesus the Guru. So we just went back and forth, and I think at the end of the day, just kind of a little insider, inside baseball kind of thing. What happens with the publisher and an author is that it is quite a negotiation on the title, because the publishers have a better sense of marketing and things like that than authors usually do. And one little kind of insider baseball thing is the relationship of the title and the subtitle is a really important one. And that a lot of times, not entirely in this case, but a lot of times the subtitle is what the author actually wanted to call the book, and the publishers came up with a better title. In this case, not necessarily I actually won the title in this case, but the rediscovering the wisdom needed for the good life, that at the end of the day, we felt like that sufficiently explained the craziness of my title. So that's kind of how it came to be. So
That's good.
I guess I'm just a persuasive guy. I won them
Apparently.
over. Yeah.
So kind of related to the challenge of using philosophy. One of the students said, like in their context in South America, the idea of philosophy is taken as something erroneous, wrong, or not spiritual. So Jesus as philosopher is going to scare them. So outside, I guess, your American context, how would you help someone explain the book with a title like that?
Yeah, and I mean, wow, that's such a great example of the cultural embeddedness of language. I mean, that every term is embedded in culture, and it has a whole set of associations. And when you go to translate a book, you do have to think about that, and obviously that's where native speakers will be important if and when this gets translated. I'm trying to think. I've had several books translated into several languages now, and I'm trying to think what the Korean version of Reading Gospels Wisely is not that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember one of my Korean PhD students said that it was good, that they chose well, but it wasn't that. Like, that wouldn't have made sense. Reading Gospels Wisely, it was something more like just how to read the Gospels or something, like made more sense to them. So that's kind of the nature of it. So thanks for the pro tip. We'll make sure we don't miscommunicate. But what was the question?
Yeah.
What does it mean? What does it mean?
What could be said, or how would you talk to somebody in that context about it?
Yeah. Well, that's, I think the short story would be a shorter version of what I said before, is just to say, hey, I know the word philosophy sounds weird, especially to associate with Jesus, but in the ancient world, in the context of the Bible, philosophy was so much more meaningful than what it's become today. It was really about what true life was about. And this book is trying to show that this is foundational to why Jesus has come into the world, is to bring us true life. And that's what this book is about. That would probably be the short version of it.
Yeah.
Did you record that? I want to remember that. That was really good.
Yeah,
so
it's recording. So.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I'll send you the recording.
Send me that.
Right. Yeah. So another really good question is, how should we grow in our imitation of Christ as a philosopher? I'll leave it there, and then I have a follow-up question.
Okay. Oh, is that a student question?
Yeah,
okay.
That was a student question.
Yeah. I mean, it seems kind of weird, and I'm not saying this would be a great thing to put on your business card, but I do think I don't know who has a business card anyways now anymore, but the idea that Jesus is a philosopher does mean that we're philosophers too. I mean, that is that it's just like we are priests, think of First Peter, other places, just like we are sovereigns in some sense. I mean, all of these are mitigated or, sub under Jesus, but to be, we're teachers, we are, people who do what he did, we heal people, we restore people in that sense, so I do think it's appropriate to kind of think of yourself as one who, as being a disciple, one aspect of that is growing in wisdom and then teaching other people the wisdom of life. And so maybe that's not what the question was about, though. Maybe you want to take another stab at it?
Maybe, yeah, I guess, I'm not sure if this is what they're asking, but like some practical steps of like, how can we implement, engaging in this thought throughout our daily life?
Yeah. Well, the second half of the book, so the first half of the book is, I try to show that this is very, very much a biblical idea, because I care about that. It's not just Jonathan Pennington's ideas, that the Old Testament and the New Testament present themselves as interacting or as a philosophy of life. And I talk about these big categories of ancient philosophy of metaphysics, how the world is made and how it functions, epistemology, how do we know things, ethics, what is the good and how do we live according to it, politics, how do you live in relationship with each other. And that the Old and New Testament care a lot about that. That's the first half of the book. The second half of the book does begin to step towards how do you really live this out. And I talk about three topics that are big ones: emotions, relationships, and happiness, and show how the Christian philosophy really is remarkably thoughtful. That is the biblical teachings and the early theological teachings, especially the biblical teachings on what our emotions are and how we're supposed to relate to them in life, and how do we structure relationships to a wide variety of people, and what does it really mean to be happy. I mean, what the Bible says about those things. I mean, I read a ton of Stoicism. I read lots of philosophy of all sorts, and there is nothing better than the Bible in terms of just the depth and the realism of the wisdom that the Bible gives on these topics of very practical nature. Like, how do I handle anxiety? Like, the Bible has a lot to say about that is remarkably thoughtful and profound, more so than Stoicism or anything else I found. So
Do you have any other book recommendations on this topic, like Imitation or Jesus as a Philosopher, that you would recommend?
There aren't a lot of books on Jesus the Philosopher yet. There is one by Peter Kraft he's super thoughtful, called Jesus the Philosopher. It's very different than my book, but it's worth reading still. On ancient philosophy, I always like to recommend Pierre Hadot, Hadot, What is Ancient Philosophy? That's a great exposure to the kind of ideas that I'm talking about. And he talks about Christianity in there too. Like, he was one of the people that really helped me see this. Let's see. Jason Hood's book on imitation is very good. That's been around a little while now.
Imitating God in Christ.
Yeah, it's a great one. And then Jonathan Wilson has a book called Gospel Virtues that's very good, I think, too. Tom Wright's After You Believe is really good too. Gosh, there's so many good books out there. So
Yep. Great. So thinking a little bit more broadly, as you prepare to write a book, how long does it take you from like conception of an idea to actually finishing it?
I'm very slow. I'm I'm a ruminator. I'm a connector. So I'm always looking and I'm always connecting, but it takes a while, especially of me talking, to figure out what all these things mean. I mean, I'm so blessed to get to be a teacher, because really I just get to kind of figure stuff out by exploring them together, and with hungry people and a preacher too. I try to do a little less exploration in the pulpit than I do in the lectern, but it's always me figuring stuff out through reading and dialoguing with friends and students and authors, dead and alive. And so I feel very slow, like it's a very long process for me. I've been doing it just long enough now that they're starting to be, I have a number of books out and more coming pretty quickly along the way. But at first I felt bad that I was kind of slow, and seeing other very good scholars like a Mike Bird or somebody who's just like cranking out 1 or 2 books a year, or he's a friend of mine, or my good friend Nijay Gupta. He just writes an amazing amount of books, and they're all really good. And so I used to feel kind of intimidated by that, and then I just realized that's not who I am, and it's okay to have, I use a slow cooker, but I think I hope a pretty good meal. I'm not a wok writer, WOK, that is. I'm a slow cooker writer, but I hope that the flavors are rich as a result. So it's a good Sunday roast. So you need to figure out who you are. If you're slow and take a while to get things to come together in your mind, that's okay.
All right, we have a couple more minutes here. What is one of or a couple of some of the most influential books that have like kind of changed your thinking, or like been one of those books that you've read and it's been like paradigm shifting on like how you understand something. Maybe not necessarily on this topic, but I'm sure you've had those moments, or like a book you read that's changed something.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's a fair question, and it's always so difficult to answer that kind of question because different books just hit you at a time that is partially because the book is good, but it's also because of just something going on in your own, several things came together at once or something. So I do think Pierre Hadot's book, What is Ancient Philosophy? I mean, that certainly was a memorable one for me. Um, I think several books by Richard Bauckham, who, I had the privilege of studying with. There were just several things I read by him early on that were really like the Gospels for All Christians, and a little bit later, Jesus and Eyewitnesses, that were really, and his stuff on the Gospel of John, were really formative for me. Gosh, that's such a big question. I really like, one of my interests is cognitive linguistics, and so several years ago when I first started reading in that, there's a lot of things. Oxford Handbook on Cognitive Linguistics. It's not really a beach book by any means, but that was influential for me. Oh, it's such a hard question. I'm sure as soon as this is over, I'll think of what I wish I would have said. I don't know. That's a hard one. I should have prepared better for that question. Sorry.
That's all right. I didn't give you a preview of that question, so
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah. So kind of as we wrap up here, is there anything else you want to say about your book? Or I think you have another one coming out on preaching. If you want to, yeah, just general throwing it out there. Is there any last words you want to say about this book or one that's upcoming?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. Well, thank you for those who have read it and I've been privileged to do just loads of like podcast interviews about it, that if you want to hear more, you can find that. So I've been very encouraged by the reception. So thank you for those who've read it. And for those who haven't yet, or maybe not, my publisher and I, the publisher hired a great editor from our church to actually make a very cool study guide for the book. Because a number of people have approached us about using it in like a small group or in some kind of setting. So that's about to be released digitally. I don't know how we're going to release it exactly, but keep an eye out for that. So there will be this nicely formatted digital study guide to kind of lead. So if you want to, lead a small group or people in your church through it, that would be really great. And if you do that and I'm able to fit it into my schedule, and if you had a group of people that you want me to speak to, I've done that quite a bit. I'd be happy to if I can fit in my schedule as well. Yeah, and just something super briefly, I do have this book coming out in March or April, I think, with Lexham called Small Preaching, which I'm also very proud of, especially on the craft of writing side. I worked really, really hard on the craft of the essays. There are 25 600 to 700 to 800 word essays that each give a little kind of nugget of thought about how to make a small step towards improving as a preacher. Something really practical steps, like what to do in the first minute of a sermon, what to do in the last minute of a sermon, to more visionary ideas like how do you think about the church calendar and preaching and the liturgical calendar? What do you do with Mother's Day, Father's Day, these kind of things. So it's 25 little essays to just kind of little steps, to things to think about to improve as a preacher. So that book's coming out just in the next couple months as well. So you can look out for that.
Great. One last question. So Cars, Coffee, and Theology.
Oh, yes.
Is there going to be another season?
Yeah, I think there will. Yeah, boy, it's been such a source of joy over the last couple of years now for me. Obviously, COVID made it, of all things you weren't supposed to be doing in the first few months, especially as driving around in a car with somebody, I guess, with no masks on. No comment.
First, you might want to say what it is.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So is it 3 years ago, 2 years ago? I don't know. So obviously Seinfeld's and other people, had some, made some great shows with, driving around in a car. And I thought, you know what? I love my car. I've got this old sports car, an RX-8, and I love my friends. And I've been blessed to have many, many academic and interesting friends. and I love to just talk about books. And so I thought, well, I should just do this. And so I don't know when it started, 2 or 3 years ago now, and I just started recording interviews of people's books in my car driving around. And I've just found it, like Seinfeld did and others, just a really fun kind of format. That you just have different kind of conversation when you're driving around, rather than we're just looking face to face, So yeah, we have 23 episodes out. We did season 1 with 12 episodes, and then season 2, and then COVID hit. We were almost done with it. I released a number of episodes, but it was hard to record new ones, and everything was so disrupted. So we have a 24th episode that'll finish season 2 that's coming out. I just need to get back to doing the production on it. And it's with my old friend Tim Gombas about his new book that just came out. So that's a good conversation. And then, yeah, Lord willing, I hope to do a season 3. I hope to record. I need to record a bunch more people, but thankfully, again, I have a lot of friends, and so we'll try to do that. So yeah, awesome. You can find that on YouTube, Cars, Coffee, Theology. There's some great episodes, a bunch of Southern profs, but a wide range of people that I talk to on there. So check it out. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I put a link in the chat so you guys can all go check it out. All right, before we do, Liz is going to announce the giveaway winners. Any just last word you want to say before we kind of end it here, and then Liz will finish us up?
Just thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for coming to Southern. And I really, really do hope to see you in NT1 and some other classes. And we have some new classes in the works too, that like a New Testament theology, and that I'd love to see in those in the future too. Sermon on the Mount, parables, love to see you guys in those. That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Pennington. We appreciate it. All right, Liz, it's yours.
Hi. Thank you so much, Dr. Pennington and Brian, for taking the time out of your day, being with us here on Zoom in the evening. Thank you to everyone of our Boyce Online students, Southern Online students, and Southern Hispanic Online students. So I just want to, before I announce the giveaway winners, I just want to remind all of you to stay tuned with our newsletter and our social media updates and announcements. Coming up very soon, we'll be announcing who will be the next Southern professor that we'll be featuring for another one of these kinds of virtual events for next month in March. So stay tuned. We'll be announcing that soon, as well as other virtual events for online learning. And the winners for the book giveaways, we have 3. I'm posting it right now in the Zoom chat. So we have Kat Sun in Canada, Andrew in South Carolina, and Lena in Ohio. Congratulations to each of you. You will be receiving an email from me tomorrow morning. So make sure to check your student email, and I'll be asking for your address and more information. So thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed tonight, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thanks everyone.
All right. Thank you everyone. Have a great night.